The chandelier above the dining table shimmered softly, casting golden light over the crystal glasses and silver plates. It was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner, one of those nights when laughter filled the air and memories were made. But instead, the silence was heavy, sharp enough to cut through the air. "To the woman who finances our dreams but doesn't understand them," said my daughter-in-law, Melissa, raising her glass with a fake, sweet smile. Her words danced through the air like poisoned honey, and everyone forced a nervous laugh. My son, David, looked down at his plate, too cowardly to meet my eyes. For 15 years, I had paid their bills, supported their lifestyle, and taken care of their every need. And yet, in that moment, I realized I had only bought my place at the table. I wasn't family. I was a convenience. Melissa took a long sip of her wine and leaned back in her chair, pretending nothing had happened. The other guests at the table, her friends, not mine, whispered and exchanged glances. I sat there with my hands folded neatly in my lap, the same way I had done during every humiliation, every insult disguised as a joke. But this time, something inside me shifted. A quiet rage, mixed with years of pain, rose slowly from the pit of my stomach. My eyes wandered around the table, the expensive dishes, the gold-trimmed napkins, the glittering decorations, all of which I had paid for. Even the chandelier above our heads had been my gift when they moved into this house. My house, the one I had bought for them when David and Melissa got married. I reached for my handbag and pulled out a small golden key. Its metal glinted under the light as I placed it on the table, right in front of Melissa's untouched plate. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and annoyance. "The key to your freedom," I said softly, my tone calm, almost too calm. Next to the key, I placed a folded letter, neatly typed, legally worded and motionless. My lawyer had prepared it that morning. 30 days notice to vacate the property. My son's eyes widened in horror. "Mom, you can't be serious," he stammered. But I was already standing up, sliding my chair back with deliberate grace. The sound of its legs scraping against the polished floor felt like an ending, the closing line of a long, painful chapter. I didn't look back as I walked toward the door. My heels echoed on the marble floor, steady, strong, final. For 15 years, I had been their lifeline, their safety net, their never-ending source of comfort. But as I stepped out of that house, my house, into the cool night air, I realized something. I had confused love with obligation, kindness with weakness. The stars above were dim, but the air felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying anyone else's burden. As I drove home, my mind drifted back to the beginning, the moment when all of this had started. I was 49, a widow, lonely but financially secure. My husband, Robert, had died in a car accident, leaving me with our home, our savings, and a quiet ache that never quite healed. When David brought Melissa home, I thought God had given me a second chance at family. She was charming, polite, and knew exactly what to say. "You're like the mother I never had," she had said, her eyes soft with rehearsed sincerity. I had believed her. When they got married, I gave them everything, the down payment for their house, the car, the furniture, the vacations. Every decision, every purchase was made from love, or at least what I thought was love. But love, I would later learn, can be a dangerous thing when only one person feels it. At first, everything seemed beautiful. Melissa called me almost every day, asking for recipes, advice, even fashion tips. She would say things like, "You're so elegant, I wish I could be like you someday," and I would smile, flattered. When their first child, Lily, was born, I was there at the hospital, holding her tiny hand, crying tears of joy. I paid for the hospital bills, the nursery, the baby clothes, all without a second thought. When their second child, Noah, arrived, I did the same. I thought I was doing what any loving mother would do, ensuring that her family never struggled, never suffered. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. The phone calls became less frequent. The thank yous turned into expectations. Melissa no longer asked for help. She demanded it. The tone of her voice shifted, soft manipulation laced with entitlement. When I hesitated to pay for their new car, she sighed dramatically and said, "It must be nice to have so much and not worry about anyone else." And just like that, guilt became my prison. I would write another check, hoping it would buy peace. But peace never came. By the 10th year, I had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on their lives, their home, their cars, their children's private schools, their holidays in Paris and Hawaii. David had stopped working, insisting that he was pursuing his dream project. Melissa called it entrepreneurship. I called it laziness. But every time I tried to speak up, she reminded me of my role. "You're part of this family," she would say sweetly. "Families help each other." That night, after her cruel toast, I finally saw it for what it was, not family, but dependence disguised as love. And I was done. When I got back to my apartment that night, the city lights shimmered through the wide window like stars that had fallen too close to earth. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the good one I always saved for special occasions. It felt ironic to open it after such an ugly evening, but in some strange way, it was a celebration. For the first time in 15 years, I had said no. I had chosen myself. I sat on the leather chair near the window, the one Robert and I had bought together decades ago, and I let the silence fill the room. It wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I could still hear Melissa's laugh echoing faintly in my ears, that smug tone she used when she thought she'd won. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with relief. She didn't know it yet, but her empire, built on my money and guilt, was about to crumble. I glanced around the apartment. Every photo on the wall told a story. My wedding day, Robert's smile, David as a baby, his first school uniform, his graduation. Each picture was a piece of my heart, a reminder of the years I had spent building a life for the people I loved. When Robert died, I promised myself I would take care of David no matter what. I never remarried, never moved away. My life revolved around making sure my son had everything he needed. And for a while that seemed enough, until Melissa arrived. I remember the first time I met her clearly. She had come over for dinner, all charm and sweetness, wearing a soft pink dress and carrying a bouquet of tulips. "I wanted to make a good impression," she'd said with a shy laugh. I believed her. She had a warmth about her that felt genuine, and David looked so happy. She spoke about her dreams, her love for books, her passion for family. That night, she'd helped me wash dishes and told me, "You remind me of my grandmother. I hope I can be like you someday." It was a small moment, but it captured me completely. I thought, finally, a daughter I never had. The first few years were perfect. We went shopping together, planned family holidays, and spent weekends decorating the nursery when Lily was born. I paid for the best doctors, the best crib, the softest blankets. Melissa called me every day, sometimes for advice, sometimes just to talk. "You're my role model," she'd say, and I would melt. I saw her as the daughter I always wanted, someone I could nurture and love. But then, slowly, her tone began to shift. She became distant. The calls were less frequent. When she did call, it was to ask for money. "We're a bit short this month," she'd say sweetly. "It's just temporary, you know how tough things can be." At first, I didn't mind. I was comfortable financially, and helping them made me feel needed. But the requests became constant. Vacations, renovations, luxury strollers, designer clothes. She made it all sound so reasonable. "We want the best for the children," she'd say. I never argued. I thought love meant giving, and so I gave and gave and gave. But what I didn't realize was that every check I signed chipped away at my dignity. David, my son, had changed too. He used to be ambitious, full of plans. After marrying Melissa, he quit his stable job to start his own consulting business, something vague that never really took off. He spent his days in front of a computer, convincing himself he was working on something big. I wanted to confront him, to shake him out of it, but Melissa always intervened. "He's under so much stress," she'd say, her voice dripping with concern. "Please don't pressure him, Mom. He needs your support, not your criticism." Support. That word had become my chain. Every time I tried to draw a line, she pulled me back with guilt. "We don't want your money," she'd say. "We just need a little help until things stabilize." But things never stabilized. They only grew worse. I remember one evening, 3 years ago, Melissa called me crying, saying their electricity had been cut off because they hadn't paid the bill. I rushed over, paid everything on the spot, and even stocked their refrigerator. As I was leaving, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, laughing. Yeah, I just guilt-tripped the old lady again. She'll never say no. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I stood frozen in the hallway, hearing her voice echo through the closed door. My first instinct was to confront her, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I walked away in silence, pretending I hadn't heard anything. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not just from pain, but from shame. Shame that I had allowed myself to be used so completely. Yet, despite everything, I stayed. I continued to pay. I told myself it was for the children. I didn't want Lily and Noah to suffer. I didn't want them to see their parents struggle. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that this was what family meant. Sacrifice, patience, forgiveness. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't helping them. I was enabling them. That night, after the dinner, as I sat with my wine, I looked around my quiet apartment and finally asked myself a question I had avoided for years. When did I stop being their mother and become their servant? The answer was simple: the day I started mistaking guilt for love. I took a deep breath and walked to my desk. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a folder filled with documents, property deeds, bank transfers, receipts, copies of the credit card statements. Everything was in my name. The house, the cars, even the insurance. They had nothing of their own. I had been too generous to see that all along. I had been the one holding the real power. I poured another glass of wine and whispered to myself, "Enough." For the first time, the word didn't sound harsh. It sounded like freedom. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the room in gold. 4 years, mornings had always started the same: coffee, silence, and a phone call from Melissa asking for something. But that morning, the silence was complete. No phone call, no requests, no demands. Just peace. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table with my notepad. The steam rose gently, carrying the faint scent of roasted beans, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about anyone else's needs. My mind was clear, sharp, and determined. I dialed a number I hadn't used in a long time. My lawyer, Mr. Greg Harlow, a man who had handled my affairs for nearly 2 decades. "Grace," he greeted, his voice calm and familiar. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" I hesitated only for a moment, then said the words that felt like a key unlocking a door I had long been too afraid to open. "Greg, I need to start the eviction process for the Maplewood property. Effective immediately." There was a pause on the line. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, as though trying to read the weight in my voice. "I'm more certain than I've been about anything in years," I replied. "Prepare the documents and deliver them to the house tomorrow morning. I also want to cancel every shared financial account and remove all secondary cardholders. Everything." He didn't question me after that. He simply said, "Understood, Mrs. Dalton. I'll handle it personally." When I hung up, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. For 15 years, I had been living under the illusion that love could be bought, that generosity could replace respect. But now I knew better. As I sat back, my mind drifted once again to the past, the day Robert had passed away. I remember the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic, and the way his hand had gone cold in mine. "Take care of our boy," he had whispered before the light in his eyes faded. That promise had become my mission, my entire identity. I had done everything in my power to keep David safe, even at the cost of my own happiness. I had thought that's what Robert would have wanted. But sitting there now, I realized how much I had misunderstood him. Robert hadn't meant spoil him. He had meant guide him. And I had failed to do that. Instead of teaching David to stand on his own, I had taught him to lean on me until he forgot how to walk. At noon, I opened my laptop and began organizing the paperwork. It was all there, proof of every expense, every payment, every loan that was never repaid. I didn't do it out of bitterness. I did it for closure. For too long, my generosity had been invisible, taken for granted. I wanted it to be seen, if only by myself. Line after line of financial records stared back at me. Tuition fees, car payments, mortgage transfers, utility bills, luxury purchases. The list was endless. Each entry was another reminder of how I had been manipulated. I had thought I was helping build their dream, but all I had done was build their comfort while dismantling my dignity. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Greg confirming that all legal documents were ready. He would deliver them personally the next day. I stared at the message for a long moment, then closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The quiet in my apartment was comforting, but also strangely emotional. I thought of Lily and Noah, my grandchildren. I loved them more than anything. They were innocent, caught in the middle of a toxic cycle their parents had created. I didn't want them to suffer, but I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for their parents' greed. Someday, I hoped they would understand that what I did wasn't out of anger, but love. Love for myself, and maybe even for them, so they could see what strength looked like. The next day arrived faster than expected. The morning air was crisp, the kind that feels new, full of unspoken promises. I dressed carefully, a gray suit, polished shoes, and a pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 20th anniversary. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back. The lines on my face told stories of sleepless nights, quiet heartbreaks, and endurance. But my eyes, they had changed. The softness was still there, but behind it now was steel. The kind that only comes from surviving too much and finally refusing to take more. At exactly 9 a.m., Greg arrived at my apartment with a briefcase. "It's all done," he said, handing me a folder. "Once they're served, they'll have 30 days to vacate. I've also terminated their access to your accounts. You're legally protected." I nodded, taking the papers. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. "Thank you, Greg," I said quietly. He gave me a kind smile. "You're doing the right thing, Grace. It's never easy, but it's necessary." After he left, I sat with the documents for a while, running my fingers over the embossed seal. It was surreal. This piece of paper represented the end of 15 years of dependence, guilt, and false affection. It also represented the beginning of something I had almost forgotten I was entitled to, freedom. I thought about calling David, explaining everything, but I stopped myself. He wouldn't understand. Not yet. To him, I would always be the villain, the mother who abandoned her family. But I had lived long enough to know that sometimes being the villain in someone else's story is the only way to be the hero in your own. That afternoon, I took a walk through the park near my apartment. Children played on the swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and the air smelled faintly of blooming jasmine. I found a bench and sat down, watching the sunlight dance on the leaves. It was strange, for so long I had been surrounded by people, yet I had never felt so lonely. Now, sitting here alone, I didn't feel lonely at all. I felt whole. A small girl ran past me, laughing, her curls bouncing in the wind. For a moment, I imagined Lily, older now, stronger, maybe wiser. I hoped that one day, she would remember me not as the woman who paid the bills, but as the one who finally taught her what self-respect looks like. That evening, as the sun set, I placed the eviction papers neatly in an envelope and sealed it with steady hands. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the world would see that Grace Dalton, the quiet, generous, patient mother, had finally remembered who she was. The following morning, the sky was cloudless and bright, the kind of day that almost dares you to feel hopeful. I woke early, made my coffee, and sat by the window as the city began to stir below. There was something symbolic about this morning. It felt like the dawn of my second life. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It hummed with quiet confidence. At exactly 10 a.m., I received a call from Greg. "The papers have been delivered," he said. His tone was measured, professional, but I could sense a trace of curiosity. Perhaps he wanted to know how I felt. I simply replied, "Good. Thank you, Greg." Then I hung up and waited. It didn't take long. An hour later, my phone started to ring. The name flashing on the screen was one I had once waited for every day, David. For a brief second, instinct almost made me answer, almost made me fall back into the old rhythm of apology and explanation. But then I remembered every sleepless night, every condescending tone, every "you wouldn't understand, Mom." I let it ring until it stopped. Moments later, a message appeared. "Mom, what the hell is this? Are you serious? Melissa's crying. The kids are terrified. Call me right now." I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down on the table, walked to the balcony, and let the sunlight warm my face. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did, with every fiber of my being. But love wasn't supposed to mean surrender. It wasn't supposed to cost your soul. For too long, I had mistaken love for servitude, care for control. Now, I was learning that sometimes the purest form of love is letting someone face the consequences of their own choices. Not long after, there was a sharp knock at my door. I didn't need to guess who it was. I opened it to find David standing there, red-faced and trembling. His shirt was half-buttoned, his hair disheveled, eyes wild with disbelief. Behind him stood Melissa, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her perfect poise cracked for the first time. "How could you do this to us?" she snapped, holding up the envelope as though it were evidence of a crime. "You're throwing your own family out of their home. What kind of mother does that?" I took a deep breath and stepped aside. "Come in," I said calmly. They stormed inside like a thundercloud, their anger filling the room. David threw the papers onto the table. "Is this your idea of a joke?" he shouted. "Eviction? Cutting off our accounts? Are you trying to humiliate us?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The man standing before me wasn't the boy I had raised. The kindness in his eyes had been replaced by entitlement. His voice, once gentle, was sharp with blame. "Sit down, David," I said softly. "We need to talk." Melissa folded her arms, pacing the room. "There's nothing to talk about. You've lost your mind. After everything we've done for you." That made me laugh, a quiet, bitter laugh that surprised even me. "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated. "Melissa, you've done nothing but take. You used my money to build a life that you never earned. You lied to me, manipulated my kindness, and made me believe that love was measured in how much I could give you." She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "No, you don't get to twist this anymore. I've been silent long enough." David stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Mom, we're your family. We were going through hard times. You said you'd always take care of us." "I did," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "And that was my mistake. I took care of you, so much that I forgot to let you take care of yourself. You're not a child anymore, David. You have a wife, 2 beautiful kids, and yet you've built your entire life on what I could give you. That's not love, that's dependency. And I won't feed it anymore." Melissa scoffed, wiping her tears dramatically. "Do you hear yourself? You sound like a selfish old woman who doesn't care about her grandchildren." My heart ached at that word, grandchildren. "I love Lily and Noah more than anything," I said softly. "But loving them doesn't mean enabling their parents' greed. I'm not punishing you. I'm freeing myself." The room fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. David's eyes softened, confusion replacing his anger. "Mom," he whispered, as if just realizing I wasn't the enemy. "I've always wanted you to be happy," I continued. "But happiness can't come from taking advantage of someone who loves you. It comes from building something yourself, even if it's small. I gave you everything, David. Not because you earned it, but because I believe that's what mothers are supposed to do. I see now that I was wrong. My love made you weak." Melissa's expression hardened. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "We'll take you to court. You think you can just throw us out." I met her gaze, unflinching. "You can try. But the house, the bank accounts, the business, they're all legally mine. You've lived on borrowed comfort for too long. It's time to return what doesn't belong to you." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For once, she had no words. David looked between us, torn. "Where will we go?" he asked quietly. I sighed. "You'll figure it out. You're resourceful. You always were, before you forgot how to be." Melissa grabbed his arm. "Come on, David. We're leaving." There's no point talking to her anymore. They walked to the door. Before leaving, David turned back, his eyes glistening. "You've changed, Mom," he said bitterly. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. "No, David. I just remembered who I was." When the door shut behind them, the apartment was quiet again. I stood still, listening to the echo of their footsteps fade down the hall. For a brief moment, the silence felt heavy, but then, like a slow exhale, it lifted. I went to the window and looked out at the city below. Life was still moving, cars honking, people laughing, children playing. Nothing had stopped. And for the first time in 15 years, neither had I. That night, I slept without dreams. My heart wasn't burdened anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval, forgiveness, or validation. I had faced the storm, and I was still standing. Tomorrow I would start again, not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as Grace Dalton, a woman who finally reclaimed her own life. Weeks passed like waves, slow at first, then faster, carrying pieces of the past away with every new sunrise. Grace had expected regret to come knocking at her door at some point, but it never did. Instead, there was a quiet stillness, the kind that settles after a storm clears. The first few mornings, she found herself glancing at her phone, half expecting a message from David, perhaps a simple "I understand, Mom." But there was nothing. And yet, the silence didn't hurt anymore, it healed. 4 years, she had lived surrounded by noise, demands, guilt, manipulation disguised as affection. Now, the absence of all that chaos felt like oxygen. She began to rediscover small joys she had forgotten. She walked to the market and picked her own fruits, laughing with the old vendor who always slipped an extra apple into her bag. She visited the art gallery downtown, where a new exhibit opened every Friday, and stood for hours in front of paintings that mirrored her inner rebirth, bright, chaotic but alive. She even joined a book club, something she had long wanted to do but never had time for because she was always too busy helping family. Now, her time was hers alone. In the evenings, she sat by the balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the golden city lights flicker beneath the horizon. Sometimes she thought of David and Melissa. Sometimes she wondered if they hated her. But she no longer obsessed over it. She understood now that you could love people deeply without allowing them to destroy you. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about forgetting what they did. It was about freeing herself from needing an apology. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, she received a small, unexpected knock on her door. When she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Standing there was little Lily, her granddaughter, clutching a stuffed rabbit and wearing a pink jacket too big for her. Behind her stood David, eyes tired but calm, holding Noah's hand. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Lily smiled shyly and said, "Grandma, Daddy said we could visit you today." Grace knelt down, her throat tightening. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling the girl into her arms. Lily smelled of shampoo and innocence, a scent that carried memories of the nursery Grace had once decorated with her own hands. When she looked up, David was standing awkwardly at the door, uncertainty clouding his face. "Can we come in?" he asked quietly. She nodded and stepped aside. The children ran toward the balcony, drawn to the view, their laughter echoing through the apartment like music. For a long time, Grace and David simply stood there, neither knowing how to begin. Finally, he spoke. "We're moving," he said. "Melissa's staying with her sister for a while. Things have been hard." Grace said nothing, allowing him to continue. "I got a job," he added. "It's not much. A friend helped me get in as a project assistant. I'm learning again. It feels strange, but good." He laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I forgot what it was like to earn something." Pride and sorrow intertwined in Grace's chest. "I'm glad," she said sincerely. "That's what I always wanted for you, to find yourself." David's eyes shimmered. "I was angry," he admitted. "When I got those papers, I thought you turned your back on us. But after a while, I realized you didn't abandon us. You just stopped letting us use you. And maybe that's what I needed." Grace felt her heart tremble. She wanted to reach out and hug him, but she waited. "It takes courage to say that," she replied. "I'm proud of you." He nodded, looking down. "Melissa doesn't understand yet. Maybe she never will. But I'm trying to teach the kids something different. That love isn't money. That family isn't about taking. It's about giving without expecting payment." Grace smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted you to learn." They spent the afternoon together, the four of them, as if trying to stitch something broken back together, not perfectly, but enough to hold. Grace made homemade pasta, Lily helped stir the sauce, and Noah drew superheroes on sticky notes that he proudly plastered across her fridge. When the sun began to set, David stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. "You seem happy," he said softly. "I am," she replied, "for the first time in a long while." He turned to her, his voice almost a whisper. "Do you ever miss it? The old days, Grace thought for a moment. "I miss who I thought we were," she said honestly, "but not what we became." As evening fell, David gathered the children. Lily hugged Grace tightly, whispering, "I love you, Grandma. Can we come again?" Grace's throat tightened as she kissed her forehead. "Anytime, my love. My door is always open for you." When they left, the apartment felt warm, not empty. The visit hadn't fixed everything, but it had begun something new, something real. Grace sat by the window again, the city lights dancing below, and for the first time, tears slipped down her cheeks not from pain, but from gratitude. She had lost a false version of her family, but she had regained the truth of herself, and perhaps someday her son too. Months later, she stood in front of her bookstore, the one she had opened with her savings. Second chapter. The sign above the door read in elegant cursive. It was a cozy place filled with shelves of stories, a small cafe corner, and a play area where children could read fairy tales. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was hers. Customers began to trickle in slowly. Students, old couples, tired office workers looking for quiet. Each day, Grace greeted them with a smile, her heart light, her purpose clear. One morning, as she arranged a new stack of novels near the counter, she caught her reflection in the shop window. Her hair, now streaked with silver, framed a face lined with strength, not regret. Her green eyes, still bright, held the calm of a woman who had walked through fire and come out whole. In that reflection, she saw not the widow who once drowned in loneliness, nor the mother who had begged for love, but the woman who had finally learned that giving doesn't mean losing, and walking away doesn't mean hate. As she turned the sign on the door from closed to open, she whispered to herself, "This is my life, my real beginning." Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across the glass. Grace smiled, took a deep breath, and stepped forward into the day, free, fearless, and finally home.